Welcome to a conversation on homelessness from a biblical perspective. My name is John Mark Eccles. I'm the CEO and founder of The Field's Edge, and we are a nonprofit that serves the homeless on the streets of Midland, Texas, and works to provide a permanent supportive tiny home community to lift them off the streets and into our family.
And I'm the founder and CEO of Inherit the Earth Outreach, which is a ministry based in Southern California with many of the same goals as the Field's Edge. I've been serving the homeless as a pastor and the chaplain for the last 5 years, and looking to see what we can do more. And part of that is helping many more people share the vision and the goals that we have from a biblical perspective.
Yeah, so homelessness is a complicated thing that we've both learned is not simple in our experience being on the street. And it seems straightforward as you get into it, where there's somebody who's lacking something and you know what they need. And if you just were able to provide that, then maybe they wouldn't be homeless anymore. But we both learned that that's just not the way it really is. And so let's talk about the root of homelessness and what we've seen as believers trying to follow Jesus in the way that we care for the homeless.
Something that was really helpful for me early on was recognizing that I think one of the most common mistakes that I made and that a lot of people make is confusing a definition of homelessness or of the condition of being homeless, confusing the definition with the cause. To kind of give you an example, if you define diabetes as, I'm not a doctor here, but I'm going to try to use this as an example. Well, I'm not that kind of doctor. You define diabetes as too much blood sugar, right? I don't know if that's the definition of diabetes, but it's something like that, too much blood sugar. And so you say that the cause of diabetes is too much blood sugar, right? Well, in a sense that's true, but you don't solve the problem by just reducing the amount of sugar that a person consumes, because that can lead to some other set of problems. At least I think so. Yeah. You have to identify the cause, right? What is causing there to be too much or too little blood sugar, I guess. You say, well, it has something to do with insulin production, right? So now you're into like a totally different sort of set of solutions. Yeah. And so the same thing is true with homelessness. If the definition of being homeless or experiencing homeless is lacking suitable housing, and then the solution is given as providing suitable housing, but you've never identified the actual cause, you may not really solve the problem.
In fact, you probably won't.
Yeah. Unless all you're doing is going off the definitions, right? But that's what's kind of aggravating about working with like HUD definitions or even organizations that really get like locked into those, is they can say, we're going to address the problem of homelessness by providing more low-income housing or subsidized housing for people. And by definition, they are in fact solving homelessness. Mm-hmm. But then if you continue to have relationships with the people who've gone through those kinds of programs, like you and I think both have, you realize that even though that person is now housed and no longer technically homeless, as an individual, they still are carrying this whole snarly mess of their individuality into that housing. Mm-hmm. Now, housing can make it easier to start working on some of that stuff, but sometimes not, right? And so you've got to be willing to go deeper.
Yeah,
and
that's like for us, the Field's Edge, our motto is cultivating home, and we've seen that home is not the same as a house. If you look at home, that's a place of belonging, that's a place of story, that's a place where people know your name, like Cheers, you know. But a house is not, and you can have a house, in my opinion, and still be homeless, and that includes people in really big houses and people in really small houses. You can have a lot of house and not have any home.
That's right. And I think we've both had experiences of people who certainly do not qualify as being homeless by any kind of bureaucratic definition, but have confided. I know I've had people confide in me. They own multiple houses even. They're very wealthy even, but confided in me that they feel homeless and a little bit lost in life.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's really about belonging.
Yeah.
And it's about how we, as followers of Christ, can help to walk people into a place of belonging and welcome them alongside us.
That's right. The most common definitions, they come from HUD, or they come from just kind of common sense, the way we use the word, common sense usage of the word. And they really just focus in on the material circumstance of lacking housing. And so that's a fine definition. It's a fine description of homelessness. But if you confuse that with a cause, then you make the mistake of believing that you can solve the problem of homelessness by simply filling in what's lacking in the definition of homeless, right? So like saying the solution to homelessness is more housing. And the moment I say that, I think some people probably think, well, yeah, right? But why, in your experience, have you found that not to be actually the case?
Yeah, I think that what we've seen is that we can't fix the problem by putting it in four walls in a box and saying that it's fixed. And that's what happens when you look at it that way, that the cause of homelessness is lack of homes and the answer to homelessness is a house. You look at the person as an object and not as a person, and somebody who's complex and has different things going on in their life, and somebody that not only needs a house but needs friends, community, all those things. And so I think we've seen that just by putting someone in a house, they may not be on the street any longer, but their problems didn't go away, their loneliness didn't go away, all their core issues are still there. They're just contained, and that's not what we want.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. And you don't address necessarily with that approach the underlying conditions in that person's life that have made remaining housed or being stably housed possible. Like why did it become difficult for that person to be stably housed? Like when did that come into their life? What factors contributed to that? The vast majority of people are housed traditionally. And so that works for them. That works for almost everybody. So when you come to somebody, especially the chronically homeless, which I know you work a lot with and I work a lot with, someone who's chronically homeless, where they've been homeless for years, sometimes decades even, looking at, you have to get into the underlying circumstances, right? Which is not just about the structure they spend the most time in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And so in my experience, being on the street and getting to know people, is you get down to the bottom of their story and you can find out a lot of different factors of reasons that they've become homeless. Like maybe they lost their job or had a health issue or had an addiction or mental health. And those things that we hear are the main causes of homelessness. But what I've learned is that those things are triggers, but not necessarily the root cause, because those things happen to all of us. Those things happen to me. Those things happen in every neighborhood in America. And for some reason, not every person who experiences one of those traumatic events becomes homeless. And so as I've thought about it more and gotten to know more people, I've recognized that it's because most people who have those events happen have some kind of a safety net. They've got some community. They've got a friend they can call, family members who would never allow them to be homeless. And so beneath every single trigger that I've seen in every story, even in stories when people say, no, I want to be homeless, this is what I'm choosing, I don't believe that, honestly. I think that's a measure of somebody trying to take control of the situation and feel like I'm not a victim here and I'm in control of this. But you get down to it and you just find out that they've got nobody. And it could be for something that they've done. It could be for other external circumstances have caused that. But the reality is something really bad's happened to that person and they've had no one to help them. And that enters into the spiral of homelessness.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And my experience has confirmed the same thing. And reading reading about other people that are doing the same kind of work or have experienced homelessness themselves, you find that over and over and over again, that the answer to the question, what is the common thread that runs amongst all of these different stories and these different circumstances, different parts of the world, different parts of the country, and it's the catastrophic breakdown of family, like you just said, that when the trigger happens or when the crisis hits, which are not peculiar to the homeless population or even to those certain economic classes or whatever you want to call it. Everybody's dealing with a lot of the same triggers or the same crises. But what makes all the difference, right, is the safety net, the community that you're a part of, the family that's able to help absorb those problems or those crises or those traumas or whatever they are. And so, is drugs a problem? Often. Is mental health a problem? Also very common. Is it economic? Of course it's economic. But even that, it's not a common thread, not as common as this loss of family. And I think, like you said as well, it's not necessarily something that's just their fault, even though it might be. It might be something they were born into. It might be something that happened to them. It might be something that they fell into later in life. But that is the common thread that runs through everything, which is interesting because it points us actually to start thinking more biblically about poverty itself.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it does, and it makes us think about how things were in the Old Testament when all these commands are coming out about loving the sojourner and welcoming people into your house and how that would look in our own day. It's a really fascinating thing to think about, but. As we're looking into homelessness in our time, and we see somebody who's on the street, what's one of the things that we can do? What's the most important thing for us to do as a believer when we encounter somebody who is homeless?
How poverty is dealt with biblically, and obviously it's a massive biblical theme. It's I think as hard as it might be for some people to hear. It's hard to say that one truly practices biblical faith or biblical religion without having, as a really fundamental component of that, care and compassion for the poor, having a consideration of poverty in the world, because it's that common across Scripture.
Yeah, because what is true religion?
That's right.
Yeah,
caring for widows and orphans in their distress, right, as James says. But what's fascinating about that is you don't find a definition of poverty the way that we usually think about it in a very materialistic culture. So there's no poverty line defined in Old Testament law, right? There's no housing and urban development, criteria for determining who is homeless, the way that we're used to dealing with those things. But what you find is these descriptions of the people that you ought to help, that you're actually obligated to help. And it's descriptions like widow, orphan, sojourner, stranger. And all of those terms that are used biblically are relational terms. So how do you know that somebody needs help or is actually someone that you are obligated before God to help? Well, it's defined in terms of their relationships. Because what is an orphan? You don't know how much they earn or what they make. A widow, the same with all those, but you do know something about their relationships. They are missing key fundamental relationships, like we've been saying, that where the catastrophic breakdown of family has occurred, those who are seeking to follow, who have a biblical worldview and are seeking to obey God in line with that, we have an obligation, we have an opportunity, we're invited into relating to these people in terms of those relationships that they're missing. So an orphan needs parents. A widow needs a family or a widower needs a family that's going to care for them. A sojourner needs a clan, a tribe, a group, right, to make them no longer an outsider but a neighbor. Mm-hmm. And so that is the biblical, I would say that's the strong biblical approach to poverty alleviation, is that relationship, friendship, is not kind of a byproduct of generosity. It is the generosity. It's actually the prime product. And out of that relationship, out of that that bond, all of the other forms of generosity flow, right?
Yeah. Yeah, when you care about somebody, the other generosity just comes naturally. You don't have to second guess whether or not you're doing the right thing when you know the person deep enough to know their needs and know their heart. That gives you the freedom to help them well. Just throwing a blanket approach at somebody you don't know, that doesn't solve the problem. That doesn't move the needle, and that's not what the Bible calls us to do. It calls us to suffer with, to compassion with people, to getting down in the trenches with people. And I think one of the reasons for having this conversation is to try to talk about how to do that. What does that look like in our context where we're in cars and we're seeing people as we pass by, or we're on our way to do something, and we encounter this person who's homeless and we're not sure what to do, or just somebody that we encounter in our church or around our workplace. How should we get involved, and how should we help? And so, yeah, practically, I think in any case, the farthest you can go toward making a friendship or relationship with somebody is the right answer. Mm-hmm. And so driving by somebody on the street corner that's flying a sign, you can't stop all the time. You can't always get out of your car. But one of the things you can do is acknowledge that they're created in God's image and smile at them and acknowledge their humanity and wave at them. I mean, that doesn't seem like a lot, but that, like you said earlier, that's that deep capital that we can provide from a relational standpoint towards somebody, even in that moment. And that's more valuable than it seems. And I think that trains our hearts too to look for deeper opportunities. So, I would say that, applying these things is looking for those opportunities to build relationship with people, and then trusting them to put yourself out there and be vulnerable with them too. Because it's not a one-sided deal, is it?
That's right. Yeah, and I think that's also, to your point, when I think one of the worst ways that we can address this is with like an us-them mentality.
Yeah.
Helper, helped, the savior complex, thinking about there being this massive divide between sort of normal people and the homeless, or whatever the group is, actually, whoever you're trying to help, because this comes in all kinds of ways when you're doing mercy ministry or whatever you want to call it, is that you can create a divide between the two sides, as it were. But to your point, that when friendship is seen as, friendship, family relationships are seen as actually maybe the primary thing God is asking us to provide, then it can no longer be an us-them, right? Because I need friends. I need family. We all do. We need it. It's mutuality, right? And so building that with a stranger, building that with somebody who's got a complex set of problems is, of course, different than some other context. But that doesn't make me any better or them any worse. It means that I have something maybe that they desperately need, and they have something that I desperately need. Mm-hmm. And that is God's. And so when God invites us into this work, it's not this burdensome command, but it's actually this beautiful grace. It's a grace that God is offering us to say, you can be a friend to someone who needs friends. Because I'm a person who needs friends, right? You can be the, I think in some people's minds, I am kind of like their crazy nephew that comes along every once in a while and bugs them about whether they're taking their meds or whatever it is, right? But it's that family relationship. And I need that because of my own humanity and because of how God made me, for the same exact reasons that they need it, because of their humanity and how God made them. And it really breaks down that barrier of superiority or some sort of division. It, instead of dehumanizing people the way that we can sometimes do, especially when we're just dealing with the material side of a person's problems, it's rehumanizing the whole relationship, including myself, which is beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So what are some of the things you would say, people say, like, I want to get involved, or I want to do more of this, I feel badly. I mean, you talked about it a little bit, driving down the road. What are some practical steps people can take for themselves, but also maybe within the organizations that they're a part of?
Yeah, I mentioned, smiling and waving at a panhandler, and just seeing that person as somebody who has dignity and value, whether or not you agree with what they're doing, whether or not you're going to give them money, but recognizing that they are someone like you, created in God's image, and that they matter. And then in any other case, whenever you have the opportunity, say you're in a city and you're walking around and someone asks you for a couple dollars, like, if you could just spend some time with that person, even if you never see them again, asking them about themselves, asking if you can pray for them, any number of things that just put yourself out there relationally. And I'll say in that capacity, it's always awkward. Like, it just is. And one thing somebody told me once that I appreciate so much was just embrace the awkward. Just embrace it and go to that person and suck it up and introduce yourself and find a way to connect with them on some level. And we know that relationships are built on interaction with each other. We don't become friends overnight just because we like the same thing. We see each other, we talk to each other, we know about each other, and we start to love each other. And I think that anything we can do in any sense, whether it's on the street, in your church, in your workplace, whatever you're doing, when there's somebody that you don't know, finding a way to introduce yourself and build some kind of a bridge toward them. That's the answer.
Yep, I think that's exactly right. So very simple things like learning a person's name.
Yeah.
Right? I think we could probably both share stories where an unbelievable breakthrough in relationship happened with an individual simply because you remembered their name.
Yeah.
And they're shocked by it. Nobody remembers their name. Nobody knows them. They feel lost. They feel alone. So learning people's names, physical touch. Right, that's kind of a dangerous thing now in lots of ways, the way people think about it. But in my experience, a lot of people that are living on the street or experiencing homelessness, they get almost no physical touch that is not predatory, abusive, something coming with strings attached. Right, and so even if it's something as simple as a handshake, it can be a really powerful moment, right, in a person's life. So learning names, physical touch. I think as an organization, one of our major goals, and I know this is true of the Field's Edge as well, is actually designing programs and practices around relationship, even if it means that other things become a little bit less efficient.
Yep.
And so that's where I would encourage other organizations, maybe people that are watching this, to think about, like, how are we actually structuring things to foster a priority on relations. And so one of the best examples I can think of is a ministry that we're both familiar with that has commissary trucks, and they go out and they do the food giveaway thing. But they're designed, the trucks themselves and the ministry itself is designed so that the people who are offering services never are behind any kind of counter when they're serving the people who are on the street, because they don't want even that physical barrier to be between the helper and the helped, as it were. And so thinking through those things really carefully is what we're doing as a church or as an organization or as a nonprofit, whatever it is it actually prioritizing personal relationships? Or are we just trying to tick boxes off a clip, a clipboard, scooping gruel on one side of a counter, moving people along, instead of things being transactional, being relational. Yes. It's kind of something that goes through my head all the time. Transactions are great. They're efficient. You can get it done. You can tick boxes. You can do things a lot faster without talking to people or learning their names, but you may not actually end up solving some of the real big problems that are going on under the surface.
So when it comes to learning someone's name, one thing I learned I was driving a breakfast truck for a local soup kitchen, and I'm really not good at names. I kind of go for the handshake, and I try to make a good impression, make sure my handshake's firm, and I look them in the eyes, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, what's their name? And I always forget. But what I learned that was very interesting is that in general public, if you ask somebody their name again, or if you see them in public and you don't remember their name after you've met them, there's kind of this feeling of like, oh, you're rude, or you're not, there's this just like social kind of friction that happens if you don't know somebody's name. But what I found on the street is that when I don't know somebody's name, that if I ask them again, that there's like this, oh my goodness, you care enough to ask me again, so that you really truly want to know my name. And I found that to be really refreshing. Like, I feel like I want to offer that to other people that I interact with when they forget my name. Like, no, it's okay. You care enough to know me. And so I found that to be just really encouraging and something that taught me something about the homeless and about how I should live my life, is that I shouldn't be offended when somebody doesn't know my name, but that I should care and be excited that they care enough to know it.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of along those same lines, I'm thinking about a friend of mine who's doing really well now and moved through a lot of problems. And, there was a lot of things we could have put on a list of like, this is why, your housing is unstable, or these are things that I might be able to help with, or I might be able to connect you with organizations and all those sorts of things. I didn't know any of that about him maybe 6 months ago when we started getting to know each other. And I would see him every day, kind of similar. It was a sandwich line. And same thing, I do struggle to learn to remember names, but I finally got it down, and it was the first time that I had seen him there. Maybe, who knows, dozens of times he had come through the line, but I greeted him by name, and I gave him a handshake. And the fact that I knew who he was, and I knew his name, it just did something, because we ended up standing and talking for over an hour. All of these things that I had no idea were going on at that time just came pouring out, confiding in me, sharing life with me, right? Because I think, and he told me that when you said my name, that was when I believed that you really saw me.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
You really saw me. And that made a big impact on me. And I think that's what it's hard to wrap your mind around, but you hear this in story after story after story, that people just feel invisible. They feel that nobody knows them, nobody cares about them, nobody understands them. And so just the simple act of learning a person's name communicates in a really powerful way. I do see you. Mm-hmm. I know you. I remember you. And in fact, even if you don't remember their name and you say, I really should know your name by now, but I don't, I'm so sorry, tell me it again. Even that is a way of sharing with somebody that you do actually notice them, and you remember them and you care about them.
Yeah. So step one, learn their name.
Yeah. Yeah. And be family as much as you can. Be the family that somebody needs.